ask a question, and we will take 2 questions at a time. And then I will give the panelists time to answer them. So far, I see nothing in the chat. If I can get my screen back here. I know, Carrie, you're busy. I'll try to do it here. I got it. Don't worry. I don't see anybody's hand. Oh, I got one in the room. Okay, go ahead, Julius.
Okay, great. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Great presentations. So I wasn't surprised to hear that we're not in a pre-revolutionary situation right now. In some ways, I'm relieved that no one has said that, because, well, I wish we were, but I've heard this argument from folks who've, for various reasons, have decided to move on, were members of our organization, felt that we weren't moving fast enough and we weren't going to be part of the imminent revolution that was about to begin. I'm reading a book right now by Naomi Klein called Doppelganger. It's very current, and it addresses some of what we're talking about right now in terms of, you know, crisis situations of capital, not necessarily resulting in socialist revolution, that there are other political elements that exist, including fascism, that can take advantage of this situation or these situations. In the book, Naomi Klein talks about how far-right movements, political movements around the world, are using the language of the left on a whole series of fronts. She also includes in it, in her book, a critique of the left, and that the left has tended over the last several years to whittle itself down in a drive towards, you know, sort of monolithic thinking, I suppose. It's probably a better way to explain what I'm saying, but, you know, groupthink, without having very much patience for folks who may have slightly different ideas. But at the same time as this has happened, the far right has had open arms and has been actually recruiting from our elements. Naomi Klein talks about her doppelganger, Naomi Wolf, who was a left liberal feminist, who has gone through a very dramatic political change trajectory to the point now that she works closely with Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is a far-right, you know, political ideologue who is responsible and has worked with building far-right parties across Europe and spreading ideas around the world. Anyway, the reason why I bring this up is because, you know, we often wonder, you know, why is the far left, why is the revolutionary left not bigger than it is? And there are upsurges, the Black Lives Matter movement, Palestine Solidarity. These movements have been great and had big influences on our society in the West, although have been somewhat short-term, although we're still in the midst of what's happening with Palestine Solidarity. The good news with that, of course, is that it's brought internationalism to the fore in a way that I can't really think of any other example. Perhaps the anti-war movement
30 seconds.
With the invasion of Iraq, but even then, I don't know if it was quite the same as what we're seeing today. Anyway, I'm just mostly sharing some thoughts. I'd like to know what some of the panelists think of what I'm saying. It's kind of a critique, I suppose, but also, you know, an opportunity to look at things and perhaps change things a little bit, and how we build. You know, how do we build? How do we build what we're trying to do? Thank you.
Gotta get back to my gallery. Okay, so I don't see any other questions at the moment, so I will go back to the panel for the one question. And I will start with Flo. You have 3 minutes, and then John, and then Gary.
Okay, yeah, great comments, Julius. I think a lot of us kind of share those thoughts and sentiments. What it makes me think of is, you know, kind of like what's happened between, well, even like the Second World War time and when Trotsky was still around, to now. And obviously we had the whole like McCarthyism Red Scare situation, which I think really impacted the ability of socialist movements to speak freely and get, you know, some of their ideas out there. So there's been like a severe repression. And I think that's what I kind of mostly put things down to is sometimes I think of like propaganda as capital's last trick, you know, like it's using it, and it has used it extremely effectively, especially since the Cold War era, the end of World War II. And part of that too, I think, has been like moving the sites of struggle away from the home front and the domestic sort of situation. So everything seems kind of more far away or a little less sinister, right? So part of this too, I think, has been, you know, back the First World War, it had a lot to do with the colonial struggles, and really, I think we definitely argue that it just amounted to like, you know, great powers kind of squabbling over who was going to get to keep plundering certain areas of their colonies. And that's what drew a lot of the participants into that war. The Second World War, you know, I've heard argued too, which I think makes a lot of sense, that it wasn't really so much like an end or an interwar period as much as like a 20-year armistice, and that things that weren't really ever resolved in the First World War, like, you know, territorial disputes and the ability to exploit and plunder and, you know, have control over a vassal sort of economy. It was kind of a reiteration of that, and, you know, the consequences that came out of the First World War, and how war debts and reparations and everything were structured. And then because there was such a weakness of the left, it really opened like a pathway for fascism to take hold. So since then, I do think that we've seen more of a kind of financial imperialism. And, you know, we had a lot of the self-determination uprisings, which was great to see, and like, you know, decolonization throughout the 20th century. But a lot of that too, I think, was kind of in name only. Did a lot of these countries get autonomy, and they were kind of otherwise colonized through financial imperialism, and they still don't have a lot of control of their economies. So part of that, just kind of making the problem seem farther away, and by expanded financial imperialism, we were able to kind of keep the material conditions of the domestic populace chugging along, so people weren't like as upset. And then we had, you know, the kind of FDR situations and more socialist type of implementations, reformist implementations throughout the 50s. So that kind of like kept people like at bay for a while, and weren't super angry about stuff. And then also in what we're seeing now in terms of war, like everything's a proxy war, and the great powers in the US is increasingly using mercenary armies. And I think that I honestly do think that like the war hawk neocon class, okay, I'll wrap up here, is wise to what happened before. And they're doing everything they can to try to not repeat the sort of experiences of the First and Second World War that did seem to lead to more socialist movements. And so I guess we have to try to respond to that somehow. And Palestine is doing that for us in a lot of ways.
Thanks, Flo. John? You have, your microphone is there. Yeah, that's the only way they'll hear you online, John. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thanks to Julius for your comments on Naomi Klein's point of view, which is always important and worth paying close attention to. It struck me, we're going through a big experience right now, and there was mentioned this experience of the movement around Palestine. Now, Palestine's a long way off, but nonetheless, it seems to shake Canadian society to the marrow of its bones, and is reflected in a whole series of spin-off struggles as workers are fired for saying the wrong thing about Palestine. So it is a Canadian question after all, and our own freedoms and the future of our own struggles depends on how we conduct ourselves in this. And I'd say on the whole, this movement does not reveal the weaknesses of which Naomi Klein has written. It's just simply different, and is a good reason for us to grab hold of this right now and address it, because we're all involved in this. We're all going to demonstrations, and it's not just a single day. It's been going on for some weeks and looks like it will continue. So a big opportunity and a big challenge, I would say. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. Gary?
I agree with John. There's a lot of people who are commentators and not participants. Now, I tend to be a commentator because I love to write, but I'm also a participant because I like to demonstrate. I agree with John that the nature of this movement, this sudden rise, really didn't come out of nowhere. There's been a lot of work done for a lot of years explaining the situation with Palestine and working away at loosening the mortar of the bricks of the Zionist web of lies that they tell about the nature of their goals and state and all that kind of stuff. You know, here we are, the only democracy in the Middle East, and you know, we're the victim. We the oppressors, the brutal murderers of the Palestinians are the victim. And so a lot of this, you know, we've noticed over the past few years, there are polls taken on a fairly regular basis. In about 4 years, we started noticing those, that an increasing number of Canadians see that Israel is operating on apartheid in Palestine. And that more and more Canadians were seeing this, that the work being done, the painstaking work that Flo referred to, that you have to keep talking about what the issues are and keep educating whoever you can reach, just keep talking about it. And it was getting out through all the efforts, massive efforts for decades of the Canadian capitalist class and the media and the politicians, the state, to suppress all the truth about Israel, that it still is getting out. And now, of course, with this genocide that is happening, the scales are falling for people's eyes. It's so obvious. Whatever you think of what Hamas did, and I tend to see it more as a military raid, which there's very little evidence of a lot of the things that Zionists are claiming. There were no babies. There was one baby killed, and it is likely that it was killed by Israeli bullets as by Hamas. It's clear now from the comments of the pilots from the Israeli gunships, they fired into the musical event. It fired just into the crowd because they were operating under a policy in the Israeli Defense Force. Now that's a misnomer, but anyway, they followed it into a policy which says if you're shooting at what they call terrorists, people resisting oppression, you don't worry about Israelis. You just kill the so-called terrorists at whatever cost. I mean, that's how little the government of Israel thinks of their own, even their own people. So, and the other thing is they came out with 1,400 dead, but then they had to deduct the 200 that were Palestinians fighters who were dead. So, I'm sure at the end of the day, they're sure there were citizens purposely killed, and I oppose that. But Canadians and people all over the world are saying that the disproportion is immense, that the Israelis are carrying on killing what our speaker this morning estimated as possibly 20,000 people so far.
30 seconds.
And God knows where it will go. So this has become a massive international movement of hundreds of thousands and collectively millions of people. And yeah, I think John's right. This is not following the course of Naomi Klein's views. And it's something we want to be part of. We want to be right in there. We want to mix with those people, talk to those people, explain what this is all about to those people, and generalize it to the nature of imperialism and capitalism, and not just it's not just Zionism. Zionism is a part of the world capitalist order.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gary. Okay, so we have 3 speakers coming up. I'm going to ask 2 questions and then come back to the panel. So hopefully our panelists will remember. So I'm going to go to Suzanne first for the first question. You have 3 minutes. Unfortunately, just, yeah. No. Sorry, Suzanne.
Is this Suzanne Weiss?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I only have a couple of comments. This is really a very interesting discussion. I think it's really interesting too that we've come to the issue of Palestine, and here we have smash Israeli apartheid. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about not just apartheid, of course, we're talking about genocide. We're even talking about fascism, Israeli fascism. But the issue I wanted to bring up was the issue that Palestine has begun, and I have to say begun, because there's a lot in our way, begun to clarify for the working class. And that's what I'm concerned about, and that's what you are concerned about. We're all concerned about that there's us and them. And the United States has helped us clarify that issue. That, as you said, it's an international issue as well as an issue for each of the countries with working people in it. The thing is that we have come together in support of the Palestinian people. That is, the working people of the world have come together in support of the Palestinian people. And on the other side, the US and the governments who support the US, like the Canadian government, are on the other side. And it's going to be, it has begun and it has been, but is becoming more clarified that it is going to be an issue in our own country's politics and in every country's politics. This is a big move forward for us, a big move forward to educating the working class. There's much more to say about that, but it's something that we can take a lot of inspiration from, in my opinion. There's so much from the Palestinian struggle that we are learning. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, so we're going to go online now to Stephen. And because Suzanne just made an intervention, and then we will come to Barry and then come back to the panel. So go ahead, Stephen, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, yeah, I don't think I'll take 3 minutes, but I think that what we're talking about, or what we should recognize, is that what's happening right now is driving people in two different directions. One, and I was thinking about Naomi Klein and disaster capitalism and Milton Friedman and his idea that whenever a country or a world is in crisis, the people will accept things that they would not otherwise accept. And I think that we're in that sort of a situation right now. I wanted to say particularly about war. Maybe this is true, but it seems to me that with war, you throw something called nationalism into the mix, and it's going to drive people more towards continuing the sort of capitalist imperial wars. I think that's what we're witnessing. I don't think it's something that opens up a crack in the capitalist system. It doesn't seem to me anyway. So it seems to me too that we would be further ahead to be educating and in between these periods, so that people recognized. I mean, my God, we've had so many imperial wars, they continue, but people do not seem to recognize that it is the American military-industrial complex, which was stated by the President of the United States. And people seem to be ignoring that. They're driven into this thing. There's fear. And generally speaking, I would say fear drives people into an action which is not about any kind of class or social conscience, but more responding to that fear itself. So I don't know if you've got an answer for that, but it seems to me that war is not a time where we're going to see cracks in the capitalist system. That's going to happen before, it seems to me, and then the war might be the thing that people say, forget it, we're not going to do it.
Okay, next question is coming from Barry. 3 minutes, Barry, and then back to the panel.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the presenters. I'm going to try to synthesize what I understand to be the lessons that flow from their talks. In the first case, Gary talked about the Winnipeg General Strike and what we can learn from that experience. Well, we learned that partial struggles are not the revolution, but they can give a glimpse of what it may look like, depending on the dynamic and the pace and the scope of the particular struggle. And what we see in many cases like the Winnipeg strike is that it goes from purely economic demands to increasingly political demands. Gary emphasizes the fighting spirit of the Winnipeg General Strike and its ability to organize basic services, to take over the functions of society, and to meet the day-to-day needs of ordinary people. That's a very important insight. Mind you, at the 100th anniversary of the Winnipeg strike, I recall that the Communist Party of Canada said that general strike in Winnipeg was premature and ultra-left. They did not support it, and they thought it was doomed to failure. I think that's exactly the wrong conclusion to draw from that experience. Secondly, Flo described how the radical Narodniks tried to force the pace of revolution by going to the countryside and winning conservative peasants to socialism at the level of pure ideas, as if that is sufficient to precipitate the revolutionary overthrow of capitalism. Peasants not being concentrated in the way that industrial workers are in the big cities, with a capacity to not only stop work, but to reorganize work on a new basis. And John recounts how the repressive emergency law of Premier Barassa provoked a general strike, which showed what was possible, up to a point. John reminded us of the call of the Ligue Socialiste Ouvrière, our predecessor organization, along these lines: for mass assemblies, for a daily newspaper of the workers, for mass demonstration at the National Assembly, for the spread of student strikes, to give vivid evidence of these ideas percolating through society. So what is the role of socialists today, looking at the lessons drawn from these wonderful talks? Well, the role of socialists is to generalize workers' struggles, to accentuate workers' democracy and workers' control to the extent that that's possible. In other words, unlike some who said the Winnipeg strike was premature, to make the most of the strike when it occurs, take it as far as it can be taken. We suspect that the strike by CUPE Ontario education support workers might have gone a little bit farther and might have surprised people with what more it could have accomplished to force the Ford government not only to rescind its anti-strike legislation,
30 seconds.
but other features of its rule. To stress class independence from the capitalist parties, in other words, worker struggles should not be about influencing, the form of particular government, but to strive for a workers' government, a government by the majority, a government in the interest of the majority, a government that can begin to transform society, or at least clarify the need for a revolutionary party essential to the transformation of society. That's what I gleaned from the three presentations.
Thank you, Barry. Okay, so we're going to go back to the panel and we're going to give them 4 minutes to answer 1 or 2 questions, up to them. And we're going to start with Gary, then John, and then Flo. Gary?
I agree with Barry in terms of the summation of the lessons. And I agree with Flo in particular about the lessons that she gleaned out of studying Lenin and Trotsky and others. You can't predict when a pre-revolutionary situation will arise, but you can do a tremendous amount of preparation in terms of collecting people together, sifting them out, taking the best of the working class people and bringing them into a party, educating them, helping them to develop roots in the working class, and to go through struggles with the working class, assess those struggles, and draw the key lessons that will make that party connected to and sensitized to what really is happening, being able to analyze any given situation so that when it becomes necessary, you will recognize a pre-revolutionary situation and you'll be placed in such a way that you can influence it and help it move forward. That's one thing. The other thing is, I'm not sure. I guess we in BC just came through an NDP convention, and that's enough to in many circumstances to make you think the working class, the class struggle is going sideways. It can be very depressing. But I look at the NDP convention in BC as very positive. There was an adoption of a program, a policy of mass public housing, well-built, union-made, environmentally friendly public housing that would remain publicly owned, available only to rent on a geared to income basis. And that was, and the government is actually taking some initiatives. They're assembling land near transportation hubs that they're going to build government rental housing. They're going to buy up rental properties that would be sold to people who are speculating and renovictions and then turning them into condos and selling them as high-priced, unaffordable condos. So the government is actually taking steps there. I saw that as very positive. Also, there was the membership, just a little thing. The leadership came down and wanted the membership dues raised from $10 to $20. It was overwhelmingly defeated. The third thing was that there was a motion passed, which was drafted by the Resolutions Committee, and it was overwhelmingly adopted, calling for ceasefire now, and echoing the calls. And it was chance. There was just so many people wanted to speak in favor of that, and then they not all got it. They, because once again, the whole struggle of the Palestinian people bursts through the stifling nature of the social democratic leadership, and there's nothing they can do about it. They have to actually put forward a resolution that calls for ceasefire now. And David Eby, the leader in the NDP, the illegitimate leader in many respects, because of the way they cheated Angela Paterai by driving her out on baseless nonsense, he has not come out to call for ceasefire. We have a nest of Zionists in the BC NDP. 3 cabinet ministers, no, 1 MP and 2 cabinet ministers in BC who are work assiduously supporting Zionism. And he doesn't want to, he's just been gutless about it. But the membership had no hesitation. They demanded ceasefire now. To me, war is an expression of the greatest contradictions, the most brutal eruption of capitalist exploitation and oppression and violence, and it does cause upset. I don't think it will cause some rallying of people to initially to nationalism, as the young Canadians who went to World War I did, and at the same time, it starts to make people. It starts to expose the nature of capitalism. It starts to expose the hopelessness, their inability to conquer any of the problems presented in the crises of capitalism and the contradictions of capitalism, and starts to expose that really there has to be a different solution. And that's where we come in. We propose a new class-run society. So I don't see it the way Stephen does. I just think the heroic nature of the Palestinian struggle and the massive support for it is a turning point, as Susan has pointed out.
Thank you, Gary.
Suzanne,
John?
yeah.
John?
Yes. Okay, I was very interested in what Barry said about the experience we had this past year, in which for a little short time, a few days, we seemed to be on the run up to a possible general strike in Ontario. Because it was not a period of immense workers' struggles here, there, and everywhere. It just sort of burst out at us, out of the situation, and suddenly we were looking it in the eye and it passed. It shows great potential explosiveness in the present situation. And the other thing is that I noticed that this Palestine question has become quite an issue in class politics in Canada. And that we have to, that's surprising. And we have to think that through, what we learn from that and what it means in terms of what we're. That's all I would like to say.
Thank you, John. Flo?
Yeah, I think I take everyone's points a bit in terms of, I definitely see a lot of the potential for the Palestine issue to, mobilize people. And I think it goes back to kind of a lot of my analysis there, and I ran out of time, but so I'm glad I could talk about it now, but sort of like, what did those lessons tell us today? And I think it's the same thing, where it's like Palestine now you're seeing is like a watershed moment, I'd say. So some people, kind of like the First World War in a way, maybe not to the same extent, but it has drawn the globe, I think, you know, and their focus, kind of like the Ukraine war did too, right? That did for a while as well. That didn't have as much popular support as now Palestine does because of the, you know, just the disproportionality and the extreme violence of the genocide and the historic kind of, you know, uniquely colonial Western project that Israel and its formation, you know, is emblematic of. And socialists have been saying that for a long time, to get to what Gary was saying as well. Like, there was a lot of work, I think, put in the groundwork, making that sort of known, as much as the, you know, Western imperialists try to hide it. But, you know, even just a few weeks ago, Biden, I think, reiterated what he said decades ago, which was that if Israel didn't exist, you know, the US would have to invent it, and how it's basically a military outpost in the Middle East, and another kind of proxy situation, trying to agitate for greater power, and eventually it's the same thing, trying to get control of other, you know, global resources, so that they're all under essentially the control of like one hegemon. So it's interesting, you know, it's like the more things change, the more they stay the same. I always end up thinking that when I'm reading Lenin, when it either comes to like the anarchists and their antics, and then the social democrats, the opportunists. But I think the fact is true that, you know, what remains true as well is that when war like this breaks out and everyone feels like they're compelled to take a stand one way or another, and I think that is similar in this situation with Palestine as it was in the First World War, then, you know, the opportunists really expose themselves. And I think we, you know, as Socialist Action and the Socialist Caucus did a good job in utilizing that. And it always comes down to like hypocrisy and betrayal of the rhetoric that they say, you know, much like Kotsky or whatever, and like with the NDP. And we had to push them into it. But, you know, at first they were very reticent to say anything meaningful about Palestine. But it really, that became a kind of like a lightning bolt of like, oh, okay. And then with the whole international rules-based order and this facade that is just being exposed in real time, you know, obviously Israel's not operating democratically right now. Same thing as Ukraine, with their like banning, you know, labor unions. There's no freedom of press. People are getting thrown in jail without trial. I mean, all over these places. So it's, the hypocrisy is so blatant. And that's really kind of the opportunity that I think, you know, socialists and Marxists with a consistent analysis can help people understand. And I think we should go kind of back to, you know, what Lenin and them were trying to really focus in on, and that, you know, it's great to call for peace and we all want that, but we're never going to get that without, you know, socialist revolutions in the home countries as well, because otherwise we're going to keep cycling through all these territorial disputes in one form or another.
Okay, thank you, Flo. Okay, so we have one more question, and before I close the list, anybody want to be on? Okay, Ans, and then Julius for the second time. Okay, all right, so I got Kiri. Okay, Ans. Beauty before age again. Okay. No, that's okay. Okay, Ans, so it's your question. So I'm going to take Ans and Kiri and then go back to the panel.
I don't know whether it's so much a class issue as the Palestine issue is exposing the total subservience and complicity of the entire political class in view of the unprecedented visibility of the unfolding tragedy via social media and, as I commented earlier, via Al Jazeera, who have sacrificed close to 50 Palestinian journalists, and the Zionists, of course, won't let any other than embedded journalists visit Gaza or even, I think, the West Bank, I think, is still open. let me be heretical. I don't do it out of psychological reasons, I hope. But instead of war and revolution, we're getting genocide and counter-revolution. That's what we're seeing. We don't see the genocidal wars in Darfur, in Tigray, in Kurdistan, waged by the Turkish regime. But we do see what's happening in Palestine. It's undermining the sanctimonious so-called war to save democracy in Ukraine. An interesting dynamic is happening, and I think we see that in Europe, where the anti-Ukraine zeal is weakening. The pro-Zelensky consensus is showing severe cracks. And so I think what we've seen is we have a tendency to romanticize what happened in the First World War. Let's not forget that 105 years ago on Armistice Day, the German soldiers walked home with their guns. They overthrew the royal governments. They made revolutions. They were armed. The regime didn't last very long, thanks to the connivance of a betrayal of Social Democrats who used the Kaiser's ex-armies to smash them, to kill Rosa Luxemburg, to demolish Kurt Eisner's short-lived revolution in Bavaria. The first genocidal slogan, I think John, you would know better, came out of the Taylor raids in America, in Chicago, was better dead than red. Inherently genocidal. And how many millions of Reds were sacrificed in that anti-communist tirade that still exists? The shock and awe that Naomi Klein describes is suffered by so many other nations and groups that we don't see until now. We have this exposure of the catastrophic devastation
30 seconds.
visited on Palestine. So, you know, fine, you might argue that the same is happening with Chechens in Russia as an aside, but what else is happening in today's war? The devastation of the Second World War bombing of the German civilian population was a direct result of the deliberate will to smash the revolutionary potential in the German working class after the fall of fascism. This was a conscious genocidal method to quell revolution or to prevent it from breaking out. That's just a sobering thought.
Okay, thank you. Harry?
I think the thank you, Hans. That was
No, we got another question. We're taking two.
sorry.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and I really appreciate the speakers for reminding some of the history and things that we would have normally overlooked. John, Gary, and Flo, I think, done a really good job on articulating it. I think capitalism has shown its cracks on several segments of the history. But how do we seize the moment? And that really is the struggle. And right now, it has actually shown. I mean, the capitalism has given a really good opportunity, especially to mobilize mobilize with the Palestinians to fight for justice and to revolt. But again, we are challenged by even though we live in an information age where that social media is being helpful, but we are again challenged by the authoritative nature of the capitalism to control the information and to silence those otherwise would speak. And yeah, so the long term, I mean, something that really I'm also trying to understand is how do we overcome this complicity? Because this is the question that I asked earlier as well. It's currently we have elections going on, and the candidates who are running are not even talking about it. And if those who are not talking about it, if they end up winning the election, how is this going to help our movement? So this is, I think, it really falls on our shoulders to agitate, to educate those of us who are class conscious in this era. The next point I just wanted to touch on one more thing is a few days ago, our Ontario Premier Doug Ford just announced he's going to give about 18 million to police just because apparently this car auto theft is on the rise. But he did nothing year after year when people died in Toronto without having home. Last year alone, over 187 people died. So again, this capitalist system have picking and choosing when they want to be compassionate, and obviously the Doug Ford government is more compassionate toward insurance companies than the lives of workers and the poor. So yeah, we have the moment now. How can we challenge it? And I really, again, it's not really a question, but it's more of a comment that I had. But again, thanks for the speakers. Really well done. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we're going to go back to the panel and we're going to start with Flo, then Gary, then John. You have 3 minutes. Flo?
Okay, yeah. Great questions. I agree with the sentiments. In terms of like, how do we mobilize? I think everyone's kind of touched on it. Just the issue of propaganda and access to information is so like central now. I think that is one kind of big fundamental difference in terms of material conditions, if you want to call it that. I don't know, but due to our, information technology and the internet and social media and stuff that we didn't have a long time ago. So on the one hand, it can be helpful because a lot of the Palestinian solidarities come because they've been able to break through, the wall of silence on mainstream medias and actually give on the ground accounts. On the other hand, it's a vulnerability because those same social media companies are now like tech monopolies, and we have seen them be cracking down on censorship and things like that. But I think, that's like our challenge, and we have to think about how to react to that in effective ways. As well, the Hans is bringing up like the Congo and Chechnya, and yes, those are ongoing genocides, and it's because, again, of its sort of relationship, I think, to information and propaganda and access to information and like the media and how we consume information that's not been on the radar necessarily. And I also think obviously a big difference too between now and like when Lenin was writing and when I was talking about, they had an international, they had lots of socialist going movements in various countries. So I think we have to be realistic too about kind of where we're at in that development of things, and which comes back to the information and education and like maybe propagandistic kind of agitation. We need to start building those connections and building those networks. But if I'm honest, I don't know if, this moment with Palestine is going to result in real mobilization to like towards a revolutionary situation. But that doesn't mean it can't get us like a lot closer and really open people's eyes. And I think we have to really try to make the connections between the shared project that is capitalism, imperialism, imperialist wars, and the fact that it's all one shared project. It's not just Zionism, it is, capitalist imperialism and the the quest to just plunder the whole world for a few, and just build on that and try to build our movement based on that, because capitalism is not going to be the last situation either. There unfortunately will be more that we can hopefully utilize, but you know, the mask is starting to fall and we just have to try to really build on that.
Thank you, Gary.
It's amazing. We started talking about pre-revolutionary situations, but Palestine came blazing through into this topic because Palestine is the razor's edge right now. You stand with the Palestinians or not. And huge numbers are standing with Palestine. Yes, there's a lot of effort by the ruling class to lie and swindle the public and control the story, control the media, but the message has definitely been getting through, and people are leading it. And I think in the movement against the Vietnam War, the other thing is this is globalist, this is internationalist, this is people all over the world thinking about the struggle on an international basis. It as you know, it is U.S. and its imperialist allies together with the Zionists on one side, and the oppressed nationality of the Palestinians, and all that represents the whole global South, you know, the whole struggle of the oppressed all over the world against the imperialists. It represents all of that, and so that is a huge step forward for us once again to propose the class struggle on an international basis. I think but in the anti-Vietnam War movement, the Trotskyists in North America were the leaders of the movement. Here, we're not. We play a part, but this being led mostly out here in the West by the Palestinian diaspora. It's being led by Palestinians. And one role that we can play, and a very positive role, is propaganda. Explaining the origins of the struggle, the class nature of the struggle, the kinds of solutions that that are necessary to resolve the struggle. And I think you know, leafleting and speaking educationally is a huge role for us in this struggle. And it may emerge over time that we become more a part of the leadership, but you know, we can still do a lot of explaining and a lot of recruiting to help build the party in conjunction with the growth of this movement. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. John?
Well, I think in the course of the discussion, it has a great strength in being specific about challenges we face today, movements we face today, where they're headed, and how we can respond to them. I thought there was another aspect of this, and that was what is happening on a world scale overall. And I thought Hans and Gary tended to speak to that. Hans, I thought, was more pessimistic, Gary more optimistic. Well, I'm not going to try to get into that now. It's a vast question. I just would like to note that I think this is worth discussing. And I think that Socialist Action can do us a great service by providing a possibility for such a discussion at some point in the future. Aside from that, this is a very invigorating discussion as part of an important conference that's been held over this weekend. And I'd just like to say, and I think I speak for Suzanne here as well, it's a great privilege to be here and wonderful to be going through this discussion and this experience with your conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Okay, we have one last intervention question, and then we will go back to the panel, and it'll be a wrap because we've run out of time. Julius? You're finished? Okay, so I guess that is a wrap then. And the time we're supposed to be finished at 6:05. Okay, so I want to thank everybody here in the room, and of course everybody, all 30 or whatever people online. And special thanks, of course, to our panel, to John here in the room, and Gary and Flo. Gary, you're trying to get my attention?
Yes, there's a question in the chat. Do you want to allow?
I think that's just is it from Stephen?
It's from Mark.
It wasn't there a second ago. When did that come up?
I just came right now. Let me grab it.
Can't see it. Oh. Oh, well, Mark K is saying, Elizabeth, can you ask panelists to answer the question I raised about the weakness or decline of trust over the last 40 years? I never saw this question. So that's the reason it didn't get asked. And to go back, unless the panel want to go into overtime, I would prefer to move on. We all need a break. And we got another 2-hour panel after this. So Mark, we'll get back to you on that question another time. Sorry, comrade. So anyway, where was I? Oh, yes, I'm thanking everybody. Gary, Flo, and John, thank you very much. And our next, and to Gary, of course, our specialist there in trying to keep us all on time, as well as fixing microphones and letting people in and out of the chats. He's wearing about 5 hats sitting there. So our next panel is on the topic greed, flotation, and the next page, class war. And but before we get into those speakers at 7 o'clock, we will Emily Sears will be with us, and she's going to be singing. I know a song or two, and I know one of them is 16 tons. I owe my soul to the company store, which is a great song, I think, for the panel that's coming up. And the speakers will be Radhika Dasi and Yasin Kaya. So that's going to be 7 o'clock sharp. So everybody come back. In the meantime, get something to eat, have a drink, and be back at 7.
Have a slice of pizza.
Well, if we order pizza. Okay, all righty. So we'll see you all soon.
Yep.
No, you can't have any pizza online. We're not sending it over to Wars, do you? You get your own?
Long distance.
Gary wants pizza.
Bye-bye.
Okay, see you at 7, guys.
If you could mute the mic, if you could mute.
Yeah.
Right.